for the sake of the recording. And please could I welcome all committee and non-committee elected members, cabinet members, our officers, and also to anyone watching the live meeting broadcast and registered speakers. We have one registered speaker this evening who will be speaking on planning application that's going to be before us. There are late reps that we've received on the Dyffryn Gardens and the planning application as well, which you've all had the opportunity to look at. Sure. So commencing the meeting proper. Apologies for absence first.
Hello, Chair. There were none received prior to the start of the meeting today.
Councillor Kay, have you got your hand up?
Yes, Chair. I'd like to give apologies for Councillor Champion.
She's on, is she? Oh, yeah. Councillor Champion's given their apologies. So, no, any other apologies that we know of? No. Moving on then, agenda item 2, minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of July and the special meeting held on the 5th of September 2024. Can someone move these as a correct record, please?
I'm happy to move.
Thank you very much. I see nodding heads. Thank you. Councillor Hodges. Agenda item 3, to receive declarations of interest and the nature of such interests under the Council's Code of Conduct, including whipping declarations. Are there any declarations of interest, please?
There were none received prior to the meeting today, Chair.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Perry, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to be clear on this. It's quite extraordinary what I've got to say, but it's best just to cover this. In relation to the planning application on the 5 Mile Lane, which is a retrospective planning application that dates back to work carried out in 2018-2019. Prior to my election to the Vale of Glamorgan Council, I spoke at a conference of the Welsh Government and outlined the failings of the £26 million 5 Mile Lane project. A Welsh Government minister agreed with me. Prior to my election to the Vale of Glamorgan Council, I also spoke at a meeting held in public and outlined the same failings in the £26 million 5 Mile Lane project. My comments were and remain factually accurate. A complaint was made about my comments to the Margin Officer and then the Public Services Ombudsman for Wales. At the time of my comments, I was unaware of the failing that has resulted in a retrospective planning application that will be considered today. I will not be deterred from speaking today by threat of misuse of the Code of Conduct. I will make my decision based on the merits of the planning application before us today.
Councillor Perry, can you put your hand down? Can I ask James whether he has an opinion on this, please?
Hi, Chair. As with all members, the decision as to whether there's a personal prejudicial interest or any predetermination is for individual members. We generally advise to err on the side of caution if members are unsure, but ultimately it's down to the individual member.
Thank you, James. Moving on. Agenda item 4, site inspections on the 19th of July. And I'll take agenda item 5, site inspections on the 5th of September as reported in the papers. Moved that we note by Councillor Hodges. I'll second that. Moving then on to the report to the head of sustainable development, agenda item 6, building regs, applications and other building control matters determined by the head of sustainable development under delegated powers. Presume someone's going to move the note.
Happy to note
Yeah,
and move.
all agreed, nodding heads. Agenda item 7, planning applications determined by the head of sustainable development under delegated powers. Again,
Move that we note.
seconded. Agenda item 8, appeals. Who was taking appeals? I can't remember. Liam? Liam, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't have a presentation on this item. In terms of your papers, you'll see there's a number of appeal decisions that have come in. I don't intend to go into any detail on them, but what I'll do, I'll just highlight the key matters arising from each of the decisions, if that's okay. So as I say, the first appeal decision relates to 1 Drittler in Dinas Powys. So this was for the proposal of a fence, retrospectively, a timber fence that was put along the boundary, originally refused on the basis of the loss of character of the property, including the visual amenity and highway safety concerns. The inspector determined that there was a mix of boundary treatments in the area, and subject to painting the fence in a darker tone, which would be secured by condition, felt that it wasn't harmful. On the issue of highway safety, again, the inspector acknowledged there was concern, acknowledged it would reduce pedestrian visibility when leaving the garage area, but wasn't persuaded that that was a fundamental issue with the scheme. So it was allowed. It was a matter of judgment, effectively, planning judgment in that case, and 2 conditions were imposed, one being for painting the fence in a suitable colour, and the second being biodiversity enhancement. Moving on then, the second appeal, that relates to T Vale in Fawr in Llanmaes. This was a property in the Llanmaes conservation area, also listed as a positive building in the conservation area appraisal. Application was for removing 2 chimneys on the main portion of the dwelling. Officers refused the application on the basis of the chimneys, although not functional, as specified by the applicant, they did provide an interesting and distinctive pattern to the roof line. So the inspector did agree, felt that prominent in the street scene, the removal of those chimneys would actually erode the character in the conservation area, so dismissed that appeal. Moving on then to Wenvo, a property there in Wenvo, there's proposals for alterations to the property, quite a modest dwelling, a detached bungalow effectively, and the scheme involved quite modern extensions. The floor space of the dwelling would have increased in excess of 3 times to that of the original. Officers felt that that would subsume the character of the existing bungalow, and the inspector agreed with us on that one as well. Next decision then in St Athan. This related to a dormer extension that had been erected without planning consent to the front elevation of the property, and the application sought this retention. Again, the inspector agreed with us on that one, felt that the dormer was incongruous and harmful in terms of its relationship with the dwelling and the wider area. Next one, also in St Athan and in Ringwood Crescent as well. So this was relating to an application seeking consent to works covered by a TPO. The application was approved by the council, so effectively the proposal was seeking to remove 2 black poplars in the garden of the post property. Officers had accepted the removal of the trees, and it had imposed a condition requiring the replanting of 6 trees, 6 poplars. Officers had accepted the rationale that 6 new poplar trees may not be appropriate for the garden, given the scale that these trees can grow to, but had suggested to the applicant that a scheme for 6 different species on site may be more appropriate and acceptable. So the appellant appealed that condition, however, on the basis that they did not agree with any proposal for replacement on-site planting, so effectively they wanted to plant off-site if that was an option. The inspector allowed the appeal insofar that he removed the reference to planting of 6 poplars on-site, but did not remove the condition. He imposed a requirement for an alternative scheme of planting to be agreed. So we await that scheme. Next decision then on your papers is in Plymouth Road in Barry. This application sought permission for a change of use from a hairdresser's to a dwelling. It was refused for the sole reason of a lack of private amenity space to serve the occupiers. The inspector noted the space proposed. It was actually at the front of the property. It wouldn't be so far short of the standards in the SPG to justify refusal alone on that ground. However, the quality and usability of the amenity space was considered just as important, and effectively it would allow overlooking of any occupants using that space. Quite an unpleasant area there to the front. So owing for that, the inspector dismissed that appeal. And then the final one is an enforcement appeal decision reported to you last October, seeking resolution to take action. Enforcement notice was issued, requiring removal of a building and decking structure. Appeal decision again dismisses the appeal, and the enforcement notice stands on that. So quite a good outcome there. There are further appeal decisions that have come in since we produced this report, so we'll report them to the next committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Liam. I believe Councillor Perry, you had your hand up during that. Did you want to ask a question?
Hi, I don't know if my hand came up, but I lost connection, had a drop out, come back in. That's probably the confusion.
Hasn't confused me. You had your hand up. It's been moved and seconded that we note that. Moving on to agenda item 9, trees, the delegated list, and that's it actually for trees, just the
I
delegated
move that we
list.
note.
Thank you. And seconded. Thank you. We then move on to agenda item 10, which is enforcement. The first one being Dyffryn Springs, St Leonard's Road, Dyffryn. Ian, I believe you're taking this. Ian Robinson.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
There you go.
There we go, thank you. Firstly, I just want to advise members, as Chair noted earlier, that there's a matters arising here. The agent acting on behalf of the developer submitted some comments and annotations in relation to the committee report, just querying the extent to which the report referred to discussions about potential amendments to the structure since the determination of the planning application. But I'll go through those in a bit more detail as I sort of take you through the background and the current position of this. So if it's okay with members, I'll just run through a bit of the kind of wider or longer background to this case, which I think is probably relevant to the key considerations. So planning permission was granted back in 2009 for a marquee on this site. It was a temporary consent granted, which allowed for retention of a marquee for a few months of the year and for a temporary period of 3 years, I believe. When that matter was reported to planning committee at the time, the report was quite clear on the fact that a structure of this kind, a kind of white glossy marquee within the special landscape area, did have an adverse visual impact and wasn't considered to be a kind of an appropriate form of development in the special landscape area on a permanent basis. My understanding at the time was that the kind of the temporary consent was to allow maybe a more permanent solution and a more appropriate solution to the business's needs to be kind of approved in that location. Subsequent to that grant of planning permission, consents were granted for kind of permanent, if you like, buildings, things like timber cladding, slate roof, almost kind of quasi-agricultural in form, buildings that are more kind of at home visually in a rural context in a special landscape area such as this. Those consents haven't been implemented, and then subsequently the marquee that was the subject of the recent planning application was erected without planning permission. Since that time, members will note from aerial photographs in the committee report that there's been times when the marquee has been present and they're not present on site. But more recently and through the course of the recent planning application, it has been present. The recent planning application submitted in 2023 was refused. The reason being the kind of visual harm that was identified back in 2009. It's not an identical structure, but it's very similar in appearance and character and size to the previous structure. And it's visible in the wider landscape from public rights of way, and officers remain of the view that it is a structure which regrettably doesn't sit comfortably in an area, a rural area that is recognised for its landscape quality and its landscape importance. Officers have been in dialogue with the applicant through the course of that application to raise those concerns, but regrettably we weren't able to resolve those concerns. The application was refused. So we're in a position now where officers are recommending, requesting authorisation from committee members to take enforcement action to seek the removal of the building. But I just want to kind of flag to members kind of the current context in terms of our dialogue with the applicant, and these are the points referred to by the agent in the matters arising note. So within the last few months, some alterations to the building were suggested, comprising sort of changes to the I'm not sure if turret's the right word, but changes kind of to the tallest most part of the structure, and also proposing some landscaping. I mean, officers are of the view that the changes proposed to the structure fairly nominal in scope and wouldn't have a fundamental effect on the impact of the marquee within the landscape. And similarly, the landscaping proposed wasn't considered to be something which would be effective in mitigating the visual impact. Subsequent to that, there's been further discussions relating to potentially changing the colour of the roof section. Now, that is something that's ongoing, and it's referred to in the report that it's under consideration by officers, and that is an active dialogue. My own view on this is I'm relatively optimistic that this is a positive dialogue that's ongoing, and I would like to think that there is scope for amendments to be made, which is going to render this structure with an amended roof acceptable in planning terms. Now, that's not something I can say definitively because we haven't had details before us that we've given that kind of conclusive view on. And furthermore, obviously that assessment needs to be subject to the normal planning application process, giving various stakeholders, neighbours, etc., the right to make comments. But I just want to let members know that dialogue is ongoing, and there is a history of consents for a wedding business in this location, which has not been found to be a problem by the council, and the council is supportive of rural businesses. But it's regrettable that in this instance that the structure in place, which doesn't benefit from permission, has a level of harm that we feel is not justified in the special landscape area. So whilst those conversations are ongoing, it is still considered necessary to seek authorisation to serve an enforcement notice. The reason for that being that if these conversations don't come to a positive conclusion, we're still left with the same marquee. And even if we receive an amended planning application and approve it, conditions on a planning permission alone can't compel the applicant to implement it. So we still need to have that fallback there, that if necessary, we can serve a notice which essentially compels either removal or the applicant to then can implement an acceptable scheme if that is granted planning permission. So I've set out the context, but the recommendation before members today is as set out in the report, that we are seeking authorisation to serve an enforcement notice relating to the removal of the marquee and its base. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. So to clarify, we're asking for the enforcement, enforcement to be agreed by committee, if they're so minded, in order to have a backstop if the discussions and promises of the applicant don't come to fruition. Are there any questions or comments from members of the committee on this?
Yes, I've got a question.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I just refer members to paragraph 61, and there's a picture of it at night time. And if you look at that, it looks quite stunning in some ways because it's very lit up. And I just wondered perhaps if, say, for instance, we are negotiating with the applicant, this is something that we could also look at as well, because obviously this is very visual and, you know, it does look very lit up here. And I wonder perhaps maybe we could look at a further condition in relation to this as well. So I'm asking Ian about that.
Ian, do you have a response?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I agree. In the report, when the 2023 application was refused, reference is made to the lighting, and it's really kind of a package of impacts, if you like. It was partially the lighting, principally, in my view, it was the colour, it's the white marquee. But yes, at night time, lighting can contribute towards that. Now, a darker material on the roof is going to be more effective in mitigating a large portion, I would say, of that kind of light spill from the building. Now, I'm speculating on the potential benefits of something which isn't before us definitively, so I can't say yes, that would definitely be effective or not. My own view as a planning officer, my judgment is that there are potentially amendments out there which could render it acceptable in those terms. And yes, it might also be necessary that in the scope of an amended planning application, we look at the specific lighting scheme and whether there's further mitigation needed in respect of lighting. That would be a matter for the planning application at that time. But if it gives comfort, that's very much on our radar. And if and when we receive an amended planning application, that would be very much part and parcel of what we're considering. But probably not something again which would negate the need for us to serve and protect that position in respect of the existing building.
Thank you, Ian. Are there any further comments or questions?
I'd like to move in. Oh, someone. I think Ian wants to say something.
Councillor Johnson.
Os dwi'n gallu just...
Yep, I'm going to speak in Welsh if I can. Thank you very much. I'm just thinking, I remember the application coming in back in 2019, I think, and at that time, when it was a previous application for building the structure, and I remember the committee being very supportive of the tourism aspect to do with this. But obviously, the question remains really, which is how can we deal with the fact that this is now being built as a temporary structure and has been approved as this. So I am supportive of the enforcement work. It's a shame that we've gotten to this point, really, because I think as a council, we were quite supportive of this as a business at the time, of course, weren't we, when we discussed this as a committee the first time around. But yeah, obviously, if they think that we're being too harsh on this, they can obviously appeal against the decision, I assume. So if we support the officers to carry on with enforcement, then if there's no kind of compromise or agreements, then obviously we can go to appeal anyway, if I'm right in that.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I believe you are right on that. And my memory of it is that we were supportive, generally speaking, of the business, but we wanted and still want to see an appropriate building that fits in with the landscape rather than one that's quite so jarring as shown in the illustrations that we've seen. Are there any other comments from any other members of the committee? It's been, the officer's recommendations have been moved and I'll second. Sorry. Is anyone opposed to the officer's recommendations? I see no hands, that therefore is carried. Moving on then to the next, which is another enforcement, I believe. Liam, you're taking this, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll take you through this one. Property relates to 12 Chapel Close in Dinas Powys. See on the screen there the location with the red pin. You can see the garden area sort of slopes up towards the left, and there's a building at the top of the garden. So following initial receipt of a complaint, site visit took place in August 2023. It was established that a new retaining wall had been built, and part of the top tier of the garden had been backfilled to form a raised platform, the raised platform being more than 300 millimetres above original ground level, therefore required planning consent. The raised platform reaches approximately 600 millimetres above the ground at the point of the retaining wall, and this effectively reduces the height of the adjoining fence from being ordinarily 1.8 metre fence to just approximately 1.2 metres along the boundary, with the neighbours in either side. So what that's done is resulted in a significant degree of overlooking, particularly towards the rear of number 11 Chapel Close. So I've got some photos, so I'll just share those with you now. So you can just see there the sort of seating area in the lower part of the garden, and you've got the higher part of the garden with the shed behind. Effectively, the previous land levels run from where the base of that garden outbuilding is down slope gently towards the back end of the property. So you can just see there the way the retaining wall comes up. It creates a platform, and when you're stood along the boundary, you'll have clear views to the neighbour's garden, and similarly on the other side as well. So you can just see the nature of the platform. So as you can imagine, if you're stood on that platform, you're going to get views of the gardens on the left there, on the right. And there's some photos, additional photos in your papers as well, showing the context of views with the neighbours' properties. So another photo there of the properties behind. Here's some photos which are taken of the site prior to the works. So I believe they're from Rightmove. So you can see what previously existed. The shed is as it was, with the garden area sloping gently down, and there was a decked surface as well. You can just make it out there, so you wouldn't have had overlooking from that garden, but obviously by increasing the levels, you get the overlooking. So officers have tried to engage with the owner to reach a solution to resolve this without action. However, that has not been achieved. So from a planning perspective, we have to consider what's before us. As set out in the report, the raising of the ground level by approximately 600 millimetres for part of the top tier of the garden. This increased a platform, it created a platform effectively that offers views into the neighbours' gardens. So the most accessible and intrusive views being of the garden of number 11 Chapel Close, as the fence along the boundary is now only 1.2 metres higher than the raised level. So on this basis, we don't consider the works are acceptable from a planning perspective. So therefore, I recommend an enforcement notice be served, effectively to reduce the level of that platform to no higher than 300 millimetres above the surface below it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Liam. Are there any comments or questions for officers on this? Councillor Cave.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit surprised, actually, because what's happened here in this garden appears to me to be no different to what the council has actually done themselves at the Eagleswell development. In fact, when we made the site visit, I actually asked why the ground had been built up and why the buildings could then be overlooking into people's gardens. So this seems a bit hypocritical to me here, that the council have done exactly the same on a much grander scale, if you like, with huge overlooking of people's gardens. And now we're being told that this isn't permissible. Well, I'm not quite sure how it is not permissible here, but it was permissible at Eagleswell. I'm very confused.
Liam, would you like to respond to that, please?
Councillor Cave, just coming back on that point, each enforcement investigation or planning application has to be treated on its own merit. So effectively here we have a situation where the homeowner has erected a surface that allows permanent direct overlooking into the neighbouring property. I don't propose to consider the merits of a different scheme considered by this committee. So we have to treat this on its own merit, and in effect we have to consider whether it's appropriate to allow this development or take enforcement action. The owner hasn't agreed to reduce the level or submit a planning application seeking to explore options. Now ordinarily you'd consider an option such as a screen along the boundary possibly, but in this instance we have considered that and feel that that in itself along the boundary may well be prominent and obtrusive on the neighbour's property. So yeah, I can see your point, but each application on its own merit.
Councillor Cave, you can come back briefly if you would like.
Yes, I just say this is the problem that arises when the council gives themselves their own planning permission, and so we then sort of get into an area of hypocrisy. Really,
Councillor Cave, as the officer explained, each application, in this case an enforcement application, is looked at on its own merit, and precedent and so forth isn't relative to this, isn't in relation to this committee. Councillor Kaup.
Thank you, Chair. If it's any help, I've been up and had a look. It does overlook a number of gardens, although I think only one neighbour, if I remember, has complained. I think the problem with something like this, a bit like big fences, if you allow one, then everyone in the road might do it, and it could become a real problem. I agree that it would have been much better if the owners had approached planning, taken advice, and tried to get what they want, but do it within with planning advice. That would have been better. It hasn't happened, and there's been no engagement. So I agree with the enforcement.
Thank you, Councillor Kaup. Councillor Ernest.
Thank you, Chairman. This sort of application or enforcement application has happened many times over the years, and I can recall going back many, many moons when we had similar types of instances where an adjoining property owner had built up a wall and then erected a 2-metre fence on top of it, which of course meant basically it was about 3.5 metres high by time it had been done. I still recall it took the council several months of long negotiation to resolve the issue. So I'm wholly in favour of the enforcement decision on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ernest. I take that as a moving officer's recommendations. Councillor Wilson, you're behind.
Yeah, I would like to second it, but I also want to make a general point here, and I think it's vital that residents, when undergoing such works, before they undergo them, please contact our planning department. We're there to help you. And I know the officers would welcome the opportunity to do so and have a constructive debate before they move to build such a development.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. It's officers' recommendations have been moved and seconded then. And can I see any other comments from members of the committee or anybody opposed to officers' recommendations? I see nobody, no hands up. Therefore, officer recommendations are supported. We move on. Next on my agenda then, or our agenda, is the recommendation for the revocation of hazardous substances consents, reference 1992/01078/HAZ, and subsequent consents, one in 2001 and one in 2002. Ian, I believe you're taking this. Ian Robinson.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Liam, could the slides be shared, please? Thank you. Yes, thanks, members. No, this is it's a relatively unusual report. I can't recall another one of this type since I've been here. I might be wrong, but it relates to us proposing the revocation, as Chair just mentioned, of 3 hazardous substances consents that relate to that area of land there at the east of the Barrier Industrial Complex on Sully Moors Road. So consents were granted in 1992, 2001 and 2002 for the storage of various quantities of various chemicals listed in paragraphs 4, 5 and 6 of the report. If we just move on to the next slide, please, Liam. So this shows aerial photographs of the site on the left when it was an active site, and on the right it shows the site largely cleared, and in particular in the 2 blue crosses it shows the location of where the chemicals were stored. So the HSE became aware in 2010 of the use of the site ceasing. Now, when the use of a site for storage of chemicals and the associated industrial use ceases, that doesn't automatically remove the protection zones that exist around that site. So if we could just pop to the next slide, please, Liam. So this slide shows essentially the HSE protection zones that exist around 2 areas. So the main zones on the right relate to the site where the chemicals were stored. The rings on the left relate to the same processes and the same business essentially, but they relate to the fact that chemicals were brought in by the dock, and on the hazardous substances consent application in 1992, where they identified what they wanted to store on site. They identified that they would be bringing chemicals in via that route, and consequently that's resulted in those kind of protection zones existing in association with those consents. Just pop to the next slide, please, Liam. So this shows just a series of other protection zones relating to other hazardous substances consents that exist within the Barry Industrial Complex. So the purpose for this is because whilst those rings are in existence, it potentially stifles development potential of land in the area. So the revocation of this in no way proposes development, but what it means is that a historical barrier to appropriate development, or a barrier to development that would now could be appropriate, still exists. So in order to remove that barrier, the hazardous substances consents need to be revoked, and the process for that is set out essentially in the recommendation with this report. I'll just run through it briefly. So the recommendation is that the planning committee resolve to approve the revocation of those 3 hazardous substances consents, and then that could trigger the head of legal services taking the necessary steps to make a revocation order under section 14.2D of the Planning Hazardous Substances Act 1990, and that would then include service of the revocation order to the Welsh ministers for confirmation pursuant to section 15 of the same act. So the committee resolving to do that wouldn't in itself seal the revocation of the consents. It needs to be confirmed by Welsh Government as well, but this would be the first step in that process. I'll leave it there for now, Chair. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ian. Right, I see Councillor Ernest's hand up. I was about to invite members of the committee to indicate whether they wish to comment or question on this. Councillor Ernest.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question. Is there any current use on the land, which might have been unauthorised, or if not necessarily unauthorised, actually being used, for any other purpose? I pass the site regularly, obviously, where I come down to civic offices on those rare occasions. But I'm just wondering, Ian, whether you can just help me with that, or whether the land is completely fallow and therefore nothing further to consider. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. No, we have no reason to believe there's any activity ongoing involving the storage of those chemicals on that site. I guess just linked to that, I should just add that the revocation wouldn't prevent future applications for storage of chemicals, and the consents in question are very specific to certain quantities of certain chemicals. So anything slightly different would always have needed a new consent, irrespective of the revocation of these. But no, there's no kind of activity of that nature ongoing.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ernest. Are there any other questions or comments? Councillor.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Ian. You've shown a number of graphs on the screen for us all to see. So I just want to confirm that this refers only to the site in question, to the west of Sullymores Road, which is on page 118 in our packs. And despite, you've mentioned how this permission and how this license stops further developments in future, but this isn't relevant really to the report in front of us, which is to all intents and purposes just for us to approve, to write to Welsh Government really that we don't see a purpose in keeping the licence extant here on the site. So I just want to confirm that, Ian, please.
Ian?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Johnson. Yeah, I can confirm it just relates to that site immediately to the west of Sullymores Road. And yes, you're right. In effect, the only relevant thing is that there's no remaining purpose for those consents. The only reason I talked briefly about its impact on development potential is just so committee are clear on why we brought this before you, because otherwise you might say, well, there's no harm in them remaining there. But so we're just explaining kind of the background. But yeah, in effect, all we're saying is there's no functional purpose for them remaining, so they should be revoked.
Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much. I've got another question, Chair. I just want to ask as well, how did we come across this when we decided to sort out the situation at this time? Is this a part of a process where we revisit licensing and situations like this across the county, just to see what type of things are now kind of dated, really, or that are irrelevant? By the way, Chair, I'm happy to agree to propose this.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I'll take that as moving. Ian, you have a comment. Ian Robinson, you have a comment to make or a response to that?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's not so much a periodic review of the relevance of hazardous substances consents. The LDP team recently have been carrying out an urban capacity study of Barry and Penarth as part of the LDP work. The reason being to try and establish, right, well, what capacity is there potentially within our main settlements to accommodate growth, and that kind of goes hand in hand with us trying to determine what we propose as a level of growth on new sites. So as part of that process, we were looking at land in and around this area, and a little bit of digging there revealed that this use wasn't ongoing, and actually the use that related to those protective rings wasn't ongoing anymore.
That's what I was going to say.
So it's about when we get to, I won't go into too much detail on this, but when we get to plan examination for the LDP, I would imagine the inspector is going to want us to demonstrate that we've exhausted opportunities for development in our most sustainable settlements before looking at greenfield sites.
On a brownfield site.
That's the reason.
Well, diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I'm happy to second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any other members of the committee who want to comment? Are any members of the committee opposed to this? I see no hands, therefore that's supported. Moving on then to the next matter, which is the planning application 2024-00086, oblique full at, try this, Coed a Rhyd y Glyn. How was that? Estate, 5 Mile Lane, Barry. And I think, Rob Lancashire, you're taking us through this.
I am indeed. Thank you very much, Chair. Liam, can I have the slides, please? Okie dokie. Sorry, just on to the next. There we go. So the application site relates to a 4.75 hectare parcel of land which lies to the western side of the A4226 between Barry and Bombleston. The field is currently accessed via an existing gated access from 5 Mile Lane to the west of the site. The site is located within the Dyffryn Basin and Ridge Slopes Special Landscape Area. Next slide, please. The site was used as a construction compound during application reference 2016-00305 RG3, including storage of any excavated materials during the construction phase of the 5 Mile Lane improvements project. On completion of the works, a volume of excavated materials remained in the plot, including the use of surplus excavated material that was used to tie the land into the new highway embankment. Members are advised that as originally submitted, the proposals included the reprofiling and a levelling of the land, in addition to a temporary hardstanding adjacent to the existing access to the field to the southern end. However, the scheme now before members is solely for the retention of the material left from the 5 Mile Lane development in its current form. The material used as fill on the site comprises clean, naturally occurring indigenous material as confirmed by the Council's shared regulatory services. Next slide, please. The submitted site plan on the screen before you now indicates this has resulted in a maximum increase in height of the land of approximately 1.5 metres, which is shown in the red areas on the plans before you, which is largely centrally and towards the eastern side of the site. As can be seen from the following photographs, the material is now grassed over and is not readily apparent from view, assimilating within the surrounding landscape. The first one here is taken from the existing access looking north through the site. This photo shows retained materials already assimilated within the existing landform is not discernible. Next slide, please. This second photo is taken from the old 5 Mile Lane from the west of the site, looking northeastwards across the site towards the junction with the realigned A4226. The top of the site, inclusive of the northernmost of the material, is visible to the right-hand side of the photo. Again, when viewed from this aspect, the material deposited has little in the way of visual or landscape impact. I'll just touch briefly on some of the kind of pertinent planning points. Firstly, it's noted that the intention is for land to be utilised for agriculture, and concern has been raised with regard to the impact upon the quality of agricultural land. Predictive agricultural land classification maps indicate that the site was previously a mix of grades 3B, 4 and 5 in terms of agricultural land classification, so they didn't represent the best and most versatile agricultural land. The deposit of kind of indigenous, kind of inert, clean, naturally occurring material on the site, therefore does not prejudice the, or the loss of best and most versatile land. As I've touched on before, findings of the site investigation report that accompanies the application have been considered by Council shared regulatory services, and it's considered proposals have not resulted in any contamination of the site. Precautionary condition is proposed in the event that any contamination were to be found in the future, and that's a standard condition, again, shared, proposed by our shared regulatory services who don't object in any form to this application. It's acknowledged that Welsh water records indicate that a water main is present near to the site, albeit actually it comes down very much the western extent of the site, I believe, roughly in line with the road itself and the grass verge here. So then it's not really been affected by the deposit of material, as shown on that plan before, where the material was much more over to the eastern side of the site. Members are advised a matters of rising note has already been matters of rising note has been circulated to members following receipt of some comments from the agent with regard to the application. This was to clarify consultation comments received from shared regulatory services, and also with regard to the need for the biodiversity enhancement condition, which is proposed for members to be attached to any permission. Again, this is the relevant information is contained within the matters arising note and has been circulated for members' attention. Noting the above and consideration of all of matters raised within the officer report, having regard to the application as revised, which is solely for the retention of material within the site, members are recommended to approve the application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. We've all had the opportunity to see the matters arising that have been submitted. The recommendation is to approve, subject to the three conditions that are listed in the report. We do have a speaker on this, Mr. Geraint John. You are used to us by now. You know that 3 minutes and from when you start.
Sorry, might I move forward, Chair, because I feel like I'm talking to the back of the chairs here somewhat, don't I? But I can do it from here if you wish. But of course, yeah, fine, thank you. Yeah, okay. Good afternoon, members, and thank you for the time to speak to you today. The planning application is, of course, recommended for approval, and as such, I'll keep my speech brief. The report before you sets out a detailed officer assessment, which has found the development to be compliant with national and local planning policy. As you know, the site was used in conjunction with the 5 Mile Lane project, and it was to tie the land into the adjoining highway embankment, and that material is proposed to be retained on site, which is a more sustainable solution than a cart-away exercise to take it away from the site. No objections have been received from statutory consultees, as you'll note from the report. Moreover, the report confirms the proposals are acceptable in a range of material considerations, not least the principle, agricultural land classification, ground conditions, landscape and visual impact, impact on neighbours, heritage, ecology, so on and so forth. That includes drainage and other mineral safeguarding issues. Notwithstanding this, of course, concerns have been raised by Councillor Perry in regard to the presence of a water main on the site, the potential impacts associated with the proposed soil depth and drainage. As covered in the report, Welsh Water do not object and simply require an informative to be imposed on any planning permission that might be granted. Officers advise that the presence of the water main doesn't represent a reason to withhold planning permission. It's therefore considered that that matter is resolved. In terms of the soil depth, the original pre-development land classification, as identified in the report, range from moderate quality to very poor quality. As such, the land was and is generally of low value in terms of its agricultural quality and classification. The report confirms that the proposals are compliant in regard to policy as a result. Insofar as any potential contamination resulting is concerned, the officer report outlines that extensive laboratory testing and analysis of the site and its soils has been undertaken. This didn't identify any indicators of contamination whatsoever. As such, it's considered the proposal is also acceptable in that regard. Finally, in respect to drainage, an objection has been received by your drainage officer. So to conclude, and in line with your officer recommendation, the development is in accord with policy and would not result in any unacceptable impacts. Planning officers and statutory consultees have all found the scheme and its detail to be suitable and acceptable in all respects, and the application is recommended for approval. I therefore respectfully urge you to support the recommendation of your officers and approve the scheme. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. John. You did that dead on time, even with a little bit at the start about moving. Are there any points of clarification for Mr. John? I see no hands. I assume there are none. In that case, we'll move on to the discussion. Are there any members of the committee who wish to comment on this or ask questions of officers? Councillor Perry. Councillor Perry, your hand is up.
Oops, there we go. I appear. Sorry, fiddly buttons here. Yeah, Thank you, Neil. Now, I just hope at the end of this that the compensation due to those affected by the scheme is paid promptly and there's no further delay, because this planning application comes to us five years after the £26 million road scheme managed by the Vale of Glamorgan was completed. And of course, there's been a delay in bringing forward this planning application, perhaps to time out the need for a planning application. I don't know, but that was not acceptable. So I'm going to move that the Planning Committee grants the retrospective planning application on the basis that it really is our only option. There's been clearly insufficient oversight of this project by officers and by elected members, going back to whatever 2018, 2019. The planning construction phase hasn't gone well, has it? And I'm not quite sure why Audit Wales haven't been involved with the public money that's been spent. This all occurred prior to my elections of Vale of Glamorgan Council, but during construction, I was persistently asking for drawings of what was being built. When I actually got the drawings, it was the day before the road opened.
Councillor Perry, none of this is relevant to the application we've got before us now.
I think it is.
No, this is historical stuff.
We'll get there.
No, can you get to the point of the application that we've got before us now, please?
Yeah, well, obviously we've got the spoil from the cutting that's been disposed on the site, and it would have been nice if that had been done with an application prior to the using of the spoil. And this sort of thing, where does the spoil go from the cutting, should have been dealt with that original planning application. So we've lost the Roman site. We lost at the time the ISIS were being condemned for destroying sites. We spent hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds moving curbs 30 centimetres Sycamore Cross, and we still haven't got a bus stop there. There was no oversight. There was no control of public money on this. And that really should be raised every time we speak about that. There's no active travel infrastructure along the new road. Nobody wants liability for that soil, I know. There's just been absolutely no management, no oversight by the Vale Council, whether officers or elected members, and the construction company were able to do whatever they want when they wanted with whatever money they wanted to do. So I hope that this is approved today, and in future I hope taxpayers' money is spent properly and there's proper oversight of contractors, and that the claims of compensation that are still outstanding are paid in the next week or two. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. The matter of compensation, I don't think is relevant to this committee either. You made a motion. Could you please clarify what that was?
Yeah, I propose that we approve the planning application on its merits, as it's our only option in front of us.
Right, you're moving officers' recommendations. Thank you very much. Seconded, I believe. Are there any other comments from members of the committee?
Yes, I mean, I think it's incumbent upon members, when they address the application, do not talk about other relevant matters, which they will have other ways of speaking.
Councillor Wilson, I think that I did address that when Councillor Perry had his hand up. Councillor Perry, could you put your hand down again, please? Are there any other comments from members of the committee, or is anybody opposed to the officer's recommendations? Again, I see no hands. In that case, officers' recommendations are approved and supported. Thank you very much. I have no other business. Thank you very much, everybody.